Here we go. 3, 2, 1. Welcome to Frivolous Friday and Anglican Unscripted. This is episode 137, and George and I just pick a random topic off the top of our heads. I think we're going to talk about Rome. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger. And today's November 14th, 2014.
Okay, it's Friday, and George and I spend all week looking for our Friday topic. There's so much in the world of religion and Anglicanism that we could talk about, but we want to be sure we talk about something exciting that you guys will actually pay attention to, something that's maybe a little bit controversial that only two guys who have calorie intake troubles can talk about. And this week we decided we're going to talk about the latest news from Rome and Pope Francis and these marriage and family synods that have been going on and are going on. And at the end of the day, I think George and I are going to call for a Roman Catholic ordinariate for those who want to flee Rome and come into Anglicanism. But before we get there, let's just...
Kevin, we have one. It's called the Episcopal Church of the United States of America.
Where all sinners flee. So...
Where you get to dress up and pretend to be Catholic, but don't really have to take anything serious.
He said it, but let's move on. So if you haven't been paying close attention to the news or reading Drudge or watching the headlines, I think this pope has made more headlines than any other pope in recent memory in such a short time. Sure, we remember seeing Pope John Paul on Time magazine with his tennis shoes after visiting Colorado, and Pope Benedict had some his ruby shoes that he was famous for. We are now to a very famous Pope Francis who is making waves inside and outside of the Roman Church. And he's doing that by having a conference called the Marriage and Family Synod. And one of the problems is this Pope does not give theological answers. When asked a question by a reporter, he speaks very plainly. And this is great for people like George and I, and great for the liberal and secular press. Great probably for the Roman Catholic Church because they're hearing things in plain, non-Latin terms. But I think it drives some of the cardinals crazy because in the past, if you asked a pope something like in the terms of same-sex relationships or homosexuality, the quick answer will be followed by the theological paragraph to explain the answer. Well, Pope Francis doesn't follow up with that theological paragraph to explain that, yes, the church loves homosexuals. And so he'll say, yes, the church loves homosexuals, and the whole world goes, oh, finally we can have gay sex. Well, no, that's not what he said. What? No, he didn't say that. And so we have to look in terms of who this pope is, what he's trying to do, and one of the biggest problems is he's not letting on what he's trying to do, George.
Pope Francis has been a reporter's dream. As you mentioned, he will speak off the cuff, and sometimes it doesn't appear to that he thinks what he's saying. Mm-hmm. For instance, there was that incident in the plane where he was speaking to reporters at the back of the airplane, and he was asked about homosexuality, and he responded, "Who am I to judge?" Mm-hmm. Well, that is not a bad answer. It's a pastoral answer. It's something you would share with a parishioner. But when you have an office like the Pope, it can be misinterpreted and willfully misinterpreted by some people to advance a particular agenda. Now, the Pope has had a lot of interviews with secular journalists, and what we've seen is that these interviews almost always say more about the journalist than the Pope. The Pope seems to bounce back answers. Mm-hmm. For instance, October 31st, La Repubblica, a major Italian newspaper. Its editor, Scalafari, I believe his name is a prominent atheist thinker in the Italian political cultural scene, and he had an interview with the Pope, and one of the things he wrote up in this article was that he quoted the Pope as saying that the truth is relative. Now, for us Episcopalians, that's a wonderful Griswoldian statement. Remember, pluriformity of truths? Now, what does that mean, the truth is relative? It means, in our context, that what is a sin in Nairobi is not a sin in New York, because truth differs between cultures and times and places. Now, you can have a theological, philosophical argument about that, but what it's essentially saying is there can be no consistency of morality, because what's right for me can be wrong for you and vice versa. And that is one of the reasons why the Episcopal Church is in the mess that it's in, is that, well, for instance, in Central Florida, if I said to my bishop, Greg Brewer, "Bishop, I'm leaving my wife and marrying my secretary," and he said, "George, that's wonderful, but now's the time for you to explore your vocation as a taxi driver," because that's, conduct unbecoming a member of the clergy. There are other dioceses, and I know one priest who's been married five times, and he's still a priest in good standing.
Yeah.
So we have, now, that's one of the strengths and the weaknesses of the Episcopal Church. The people in New York can go absolutely cuckoo. Doesn't change anything down here in the swamps of Florida. But when the Catholic Church, when its head and its centralizations shifts, the reverberations go worldwide.
Yeah, and they have gone worldwide. I mean, when you make the front headline of Drudge Report, that's bad. It is what it is. I remember there used to be a joke that you're going to have a bad day when the 60 Minutes news crew is in your office waiting to do an interview. It's all over. And it's not that much different when you're making headlines, and the headlines are not telling people what you think. They're telling people what people think you think. And right now we're in that place where all we're hearing about the Pope is what people think the Pope thinks. Cardinal Burke was recently, people say, demoted, moved on, removed from his role, fired. I don't know the exact Roman Latin term, but he no longer works in the high office.
Deep six.
What's that?
Deep six.
Deep six is the Latin term. Deepish olea sixie. And so he's no longer in the role he was in, which was quite a high role of authority in the church. And he is a conservative cardinal in the church. There's a Cardinal Casper from Germany, right? Yeah.
Walter Casper.
Yep. Who is a liberal, who is maintaining his position and says he gets to speak to the Pope frequently. And so back to this marriage and family synod. In such, they're discussing the relation of the church to marriage, to the Eucharist, to same-sex relationships, to sexuality. That was part one. Part two now is the sexual relationship between the man and woman.
Well, the Synod on the Family was earlier this month.
Right.
That was where several hundred bishops were invited by the Pope to speak on these issues. A year from now, there'll be the second Synod.
Right.
Now, on November 17th, there's a 3-day colloquium.
All these words.
On complementarity of man and woman.
That's
and it's being put forward by the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, the Pontifical Council on the Family, Ecumenical Interfaith Relations. And this, in essence, is this is round 2. Round 3 will be next year. Round 2 is if the empire strikes back, if you're a liberal. The conservatives are bringing out all their big guns and are basically going to lay down to the Pope, who is giving the opening address, Francis, this is why you can't allow these changes of, gay marriage or gay civil unions, or changing the focus of the family from the traditional nuclear family to, Johnny has 2 daddies or whatever.
Well, but the most interesting part of round 2, The Empire Strikes Back, is the ecumenical presence, There's Anglicans have invited prominent people from other denominations.
Rick Warren,
Rick Warren,
Rick Warren, Russell Moore from the Southern Baptist Convention,
yeah.
as well as Lord Sachs, the former chief rabbi of the UK, who's a very prominent conservative Jewish leader. There's a Sikh, a Hindu, there's a Muslim, and then there are the heavyweight hitters in the Catholic world. Archbishop of Philadelphia, Charles Chaput. Chaput, C-H-A-P-U-T. It's pronounced Chaput.
Well, as long as we're going to do Star Wars analogies, wouldn't that be Chewie? But, oh, okay, whatever.
Okay.
So, but we've now got to the point where the Roman Catholic Church has almost called a council of the church. It's so much important that they're bringing in the non-Roman Catholics to not just seek counsel, but to have this discussion about the compatibility between man and woman, and it's neat to see this. And are we almost to the point now where in a couple years this Pope will have the ability to, because he's been so open in the past, call a Vatican III, or is this all going to fall apart?
Well, Kevin, there are wheels within wheels within wheels, and some of our viewers may know Callistos Ware.
Oh.
He's an Englishman, but he's an Orthodox bishop, and he is a leading Orthodox theologian under the authority of the Ecumenical Patriarch in Istanbul. Callistos Ware has made a film speaking of the recent Synod on the Family, and setting aside the family business. Callistos Ware says, I'm really encouraged because the Pope is becoming more Orthodox. Not orthodox with the small o regarding family relations, but rather orthodox with the big O, which is allowing a synodical form of government. In other words, having different voices all subside within the Catholic world as we Orthodox do.
And that's called a conciliar church.
And so the Orthodox they're not in favor of what the Pope is doing on sort of family and social issues. But they see in Francis's moves a nod that, yes, we were right in 1054 all those years ago, and you Catholics have got it wrong, and now you're seeing the light. So there's that part to it. Then there's the liberal Catholics like Walter Casper, who want to make this is their last gasp. This is the final throw of the dice for them because Pope John Paul and Pope Benedict basically stacked the deck against them. The liberals are not reproducing themselves, and this is their last chance to implement liberation theology and the alliance with secular society that we see the Catholic Church pursuing in Germany and France and Holland and many places. So we've got that going on, and then we see the rising African church, whom Walter Casper said, you can't pay attention to these guys because they're ignorant savages. All of this is going on, and Francis has lost control, it seems. That's part of what Cardinal Burke was saying. Francis, you need to speak up. And we haven't had cardinals talk about the Pope like this in public since there was an anti-Pope in Avignon 500-600 years ago.
Yeah, it's been a while. And look, now, we can't complain. George and I love to talk about religion, politically, events in religion, and we like the church to be transparent. Years ago, all this would have been done in relative secrecy. Planes would have flown in, buses would have taken these people into Rome without us seeing it. This is done pretty much, in the open as far as Rome is, but we do need to have more earnest communication from Pope Francis about what his intentions are. Right now, the problem is we're being told what his intentions are. He's not telling us his intentions.
You're absolutely right. But also I want our viewers to remember that things don't stand still while we wait for the Pope.
No.
This past Sunday, Foley Beach met with Metropolitan Hilarion of Volkomsk. So what? Well, he is the official overseas spokesman for the Russian Orthodox Church. Now, remember, the Russian Orthodox Church has basically cut dead the Episcopal Church. The Episcopal Church doesn't exist in their eyes, and they're forming relations with Orthodoxy. Now, this is not the Orthodox Church of America and Archbishop Jonah and all those things that we saw in Fort Worth a few years ago. This is Hilarion basically trying to bring into the Russian Orthodox political, social, theological orbit the ACNA. Mm-hmm. Now, they're wheels within wheels because the Orthodox are fighting the Catholics over the situation in the Ukraine, That's the right. Russians, and it's always great to have another ally on your side. But my point is, all of these things are going on that are not only, if Francis is leading with pastoral, we want to be nice to people who may feel alienated from the church. That's important. But we also have theological rigor. That's important. And we also have the reality of the theological, social, cultural relations of churches in this world. We can't stand still while Francis makes nice with people. The world is going to move forward, and he's allowed other people to drive his agenda, I believe.
Yeah. We'll have to see what happens. All right, we just devoted 15 minutes of Anglican Unscripted to the Roman Catholic Church. Maybe Pope Francis is on the Canterbury Trail.
I thought you were walking around with Susan, will you reach behind my jacket and pull down the cord?
Reach under here?
Yeah, pull it down.
This down.
Yeah, and then plug. Susan, Susie could hear you. Pervert.
Well, you guys are empty nesters now, so I can't expect anything else. Yeah.
Oh, Susan was telling me that she thinks that you could be a farmer. She imagines you would be as a beekeeper.
A beekeeper.
Don't ask me why.
It's more gentlemanly.
It's more gentlemanly.
It's more gentlemanly.
A gentleman beekeeper farmer.
You know, I if I were a beekeeper, I doubt I would be married. You know, most of the women I run into were afraid of bees, so I would be a single beekeeper. Because Mrs. Anglican TV can do the most amazing swat whenever there's a yellowed creature in the air. And my kids that will run and scream like little girls. Ah!
But they are little girls. They're supposed to.